My daughter-in-law called me and said, "We put your house on the market. You'll thank us later." I did not raise my voice. I simply said, "Good luck with that," hung up, and drove straight to the county recorder's office. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone for a long moment after the line went dead. Outside, the maple trees were dropping their first orange leaves onto the lawn I'd mowed every Saturday for 31 years. I thought about the way Sherry's voice had sounded bright, rehearsed, like she was reading off a card. Not a question, not a request, an announcement. My house, the one Carol and I bought back when our son Michael was still in diapers, was apparently already listed. I hadn't signed a single form. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something, my friend. Have you ever had someone you raised, someone you'd have died for, look you in the eye and treat you like a problem to be managed? If you have, you already know the particular kind of cold that settles into your chest. Stick with me to the end, because what I found in that recorder's office was only the first domino, and by the time it was all over, the people who thought I was finished were the ones who ended up with nothing. My name is Walter Bricknell. I'm 68 years old. For 39 years, I ran a precision tool and die shop outside Dayton, Ohio, Bricknell Machine Works. I started it in a rented garage with 2 second-hand lathes and a line of credit my own father co-signed, terrified the whole time that I'd lose the house. I built it, sweat and steel shavings and 16-hour days, into a supplier that 3 of the big auto plants depended on. I am not a man who panics. I am a man who reads the tolerance stamped on a blueprint and trusts the numbers over the noise. And the numbers, that afternoon, told me my own son was trying to sell the roof over my head. Michael was 36. He'd married Sherry 4 years earlier, a real estate agent with a smile that never seemed to reach past her teeth. My wife Carol passed 6 years ago, an aneurysm, no warning, gone between one Tuesday and the next, and something in our family loosened after that. Like a bolt nobody remembered to torque back down. Michael started coming around more. Sherry started coming around more. At first, I was grateful. A man alone in a big house gets used to eating dinner in front of the television, and I liked hearing voices in the hallway again, even second-hand ones. 8 months before that phone call, Michael and Sherry sat at my kitchen table and told me they wanted to move into the guest cottage out back, the little place Carol always called the retirement house, the one we'd built for exactly that. Someday, when Michael had a family of his own and needed somewhere close but separate, Sherry held my hand across the table. "We just want to be near you, Walter," she said, and there were actual tears standing in her eyes. "You shouldn't be rattling around this big place all alone. Let us look after you." I remember exactly how it felt to sign over the deed to that cottage into a joint trust, thinking I was building a bridge, not handing someone a crowbar. I gave them the cottage outright. I helped Michael get a small business loan for a landscaping company, co-signed it myself, put up $40,000 of my own savings besides. I thought I was doing what Carol would have wanted, keeping the family close, keeping the bloodline in one place. Instead, I had just handed them a foothold on my property, and I hadn't yet understood what they intended to build on it. The landscaping business failed within the year. Equipment repossessed, 2 lawsuits from unpaid suppliers, a mountain of debt with my name still stapled to the loan. Michael told me it was bad luck, a bad economy, an unreliable partner who'd skipped town with the deposits. I believed him because that's what fathers do. I refinanced part of my own retirement account to cover the loan default so it wouldn't wreck both our credit. Nobody thanked me for that. Nobody mentioned it again. It simply vanished into the growing silence between what I was told and what was actually happening. The fall came, cold and early that year, and I started noticing small things. My prescription bottles rearranged in the medicine cabinet, my checkbook, which I always kept in the same drawer of my desk, showing up in the kitchen instead. A stack of unopened mail from my bank that I could have sworn I'd already gone through. Sherry started dropping by more, always with some excuse, bringing over a casserole, checking the thermostat. "Just seeing how you're doing, Walter. You seem a little foggy lately." She began keeping a little notebook, she said, "just to help track your appointments." And I noticed she was writing things down after nearly every conversation we had, her pen moving fast, her eyes never quite meeting mine. Then came the morning Michael called from the garden center, a routine, easy call. Nothing unusual in his voice, and mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Sherry had already had the house appraised. "For insurance purposes," he said. I let it pass. 2 weeks later, a different neighbor, Ruth Palasek, stopped me at the mailbox and asked, with the careful delicacy of someone delivering bad news, whether I was planning to sell, because she'd seen a realtor's sign truck idling in my driveway the day before while I was at my cardiologist appointment. That was the day the fog in my head, because there had been a fog, a real one, thick and disorienting for weeks, started to burn away, and I began to understand it wasn't age. It wasn't a stroke waiting to happen, which was what I'd quietly started to fear. Something else was going on inside my own house. I did not confront anyone. Confronting people gives them the chance to rehearse a lie before you catch them saying it. Instead, that same evening, I told Michael and Sherry I was tired and going to bed early, and I sat in the dark of my bedroom with the door cracked, listening. I heard Sherry's voice through the thin wall separating the main house from the mudroom she used as a shortcut to the cottage. "He's getting worse," she was saying, quiet and satisfied, like a woman describing a soup coming along nicely. "2 more months of the new vitamins and Dr. Ferris will sign off on anything we need him to sign." I lay very still in that dark room and felt something in my chest go from hot to cold, the exact way a piece of tool steel does when you finally quench it, and it stops being pliable forever. The next morning, I drove to my personal physician, not Dr. Ferris, a name I'd never once heard before that night, but Dr. Alan Whitfield, who'd treated me for 22 years and who Sherry, I would later learn, had been quietly trying to have replaced. I asked him, calmly, to run a full-panel blood work, cognitive screening, everything, and to please tell me honestly what he found. 3 days later, sitting in his office under fluorescent light, he told me my labs showed elevated levels of a sedating antihistamine compound, far beyond anything I'd been prescribed, along with trace markers consistent with a mild anticonvulsant that had absolutely no business being in my bloodstream at all. Someone had been drugging me, quietly, patiently, dose by dose, in the vitamins Sherry had been so lovingly setting out beside my morning coffee every single day for 2 months. Dr. Whitfield's face went pale reading the numbers. Mine did not. I sat very still, the way I used to sit reviewing a failed part off the production line, tracing the defect back to its root cause instead of getting angry at the machine. I thanked him, asked him to document everything and keep a sealed copy in my file, and drove home with the windows down, letting the cold October air scrub the last of the fog fully out of my head. That was the night I stopped being a father worrying about his son's struggling marriage, and I became something closer to what I'd been for 4 decades, running that shop, a man auditing a catastrophic failure, tracing every stress fracture back to the moment the material first gave way. I did not sleep. I sat at my desk with a legal pad and started writing down every strange detail of the past 8 months, the way I used to log a defect report: date, symptom, suspected cause, the missing checkbook, the mysterious Dr. Ferris, the realtor's truck, the $40,000, the joint trust on the cottage. Piece by piece, a picture assembled itself, ugly and precise, and by 4 in the morning I understood exactly what I was looking at. They needed me diagnosed, declared incompetent, and legally sidelined, and they needed it fast, because whatever they were planning required my full house, not just the cottage, and they intended to have both the deed and my silence before Thanksgiving. At 7 that morning, before either of them was awake, I drove to the Montgomery County Recorder's office and requested a full title history and any pending filings on my property. The clerk, a patient woman named Denise, who'd helped me refinance years earlier, pulled it up without much interest until her eyebrows lifted. There was, in fact, a listing agreement filed with a local brokerage, Sherry's own agency, dated 6 days earlier, along with a power of attorney document attached to the file, purportedly signed by me, granting Michael the authority to sell real property on my behalf. I had never signed that document. I had never even seen it. Denise printed everything for me, her hands steady but her voice careful, the voice people use when they suspect they're standing next to something about to detonate. I thanked her, folded the papers into my coat, and drove not home but to the office of Grace Okonkwo, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who'd handled the incorporation of my shop back in 1987 and who I trusted the way I trusted a well-calibrated gauge. Grace read through the forged power of attorney twice, her jaw tightening with each page. "Walter," she said finally, "this signature isn't even a good forgery, but that's almost worse. It means Whoever filed this assumed nobody would ever check. She looked up at me. Someone was counting on you not paying attention, or not being capable of paying attention. I told her about the blood work, about the overheard conversation through the wall, about Dr. Ferris, a name that meant nothing to either of us yet. Grace's expression shifted from professional concern into something flintier. "There's a name for what this looks like," she said quietly. "It's called elder financial exploitation. And if there's a doctor involved falsifying a cognitive decline to support a competency filing, that's not a family dispute anymore, Walter. That's a felony conspiracy." She asked me the question that changed everything about how I moved forward from that morning. "Do you want this handled quietly, or do you want it handled completely?" I thought about Carol, about the vegetable garden she'd planted along the south fence the year before she died, about the cottage we'd built with our own hands for a grandchild we'd hoped Michael would eventually give us, about 39 years of blueprints and tolerances, and never once cutting a corner, because a corner cut always comes back to bite you later. I told Grace I wanted it handled the way I'd handle a defective part that had already shipped to 3 different customers. Find every unit. Trace the batch. Recall the whole line before it hurts anyone else. "Completely," I said. Grace nodded once, like she'd expected exactly that answer, and reached for her phone. Over the following 4 days, while Michael and Sherry continued bringing me casseroles and vitamins, I had quietly stopped taking, pretending instead to swallow them and disposing of the pills in a folded tissue. Grace and a forensic accountant she trusted named Priya Anand began pulling apart the financial architecture Sherry and Michael had built around me. What they found made my hands shake for the first time since this whole thing started, not from fear, but from the specific fury of watching a plan you thought you understood turn out to be so much larger and colder than you'd first assumed. The landscaping business hadn't simply failed from bad luck. Priya traced 2 years of invoices and discovered Michael had been systematically overbilling non-existent jobs to a shell account, funneling roughly $80,000 of the business loan, my co-signed loan, directly into an account held solely by Sherry, under her maiden name, at a bank 3 counties away. The failure of the business had been engineered from the inside, a controlled demolition designed to look like misfortune, while quietly moving cash sideways before the walls came down. Worse, Dr. Ferris turned out to be real, but not remotely what Sherry had implied. He wasn't my new physician. He was a semi-retired internist operating a cash-only wellness consultation practice out of a strip mall clinic. A man whose medical license, Grace discovered through the state board, had already been placed on a formal monitoring status 2 years earlier, following a prior complaint involving improperly documented capacity evaluations for an elderly patient in a contested inheritance case in a neighboring county. Sherry had paid him $1,500 in cash for a single unwitnessed home visit, a visit I had never consented to and did not remember happening, because Priya and Grace both suspected it likely occurred on a night I'd been most heavily sedated. Dr. Ferris had produced a signed cognitive evaluation stating I showed moderate signs of progressive dementia with impaired judgment regarding financial decision-making, a document dated exactly 9 days before the forged power of attorney appeared at the recorder's office. They had built, piece by piece, an entire fraudulent paper trail designed to make an emergency guardianship filing look airtight, a chemically induced fog to produce the symptoms, a paid-off doctor to produce the diagnosis, a forged legal document to produce the authority, and a quiet listing agreement already filed with Sherry's brokerage, so the house could be sold, and the proceeds moved before I ever fully understood what had been done to me. I sat in Grace's conference room, staring at the printed evaluation with Dr. Ferris's shaky, unconvincing signature at the bottom, and I felt the same sensation I used to get standing over a machine that had just thrown a part clean across the shop floor, that sharp, clarifying moment where fear and anger burn off completely, and all that's left is the plain, cold need to fix the failure correctly, once, so it never happens again. "There's more," Priya said, sliding another folder across the table, and this was the part that finally, truly, broke something loose in my chest. Buried in Sherry's financial records was a life insurance policy, a policy on me, taken out 4 months earlier, naming Sherry as primary beneficiary, for $2 million. Michael's signature appeared nowhere on it. He wasn't even listed as a contingent beneficiary. Whatever Sherry had told him about their shared future, Whatever story had convinced my own son to help forge a legal document against his father, it seemed increasingly clear that Sherry's actual plan had very little room in it for Michael at all. I did not tell Michael what I'd found. Not yet. A father learns, sometimes late, sometimes at enormous cost, that giving someone the chance to get their story straight before you show them the evidence only helps them build a better lie. Instead, I called Grace's investigator, a quiet, methodical, retired detective named Ray Doss, and I asked him to do exactly one thing: find out where Sherry actually intended to be the week the sale of my house was scheduled to close, and find out who else, besides Dr. Ferris, was helping her get there. It took Ray 6 days. What he brought back to Grace's office landed on the table like a dropped anvil. Sherry had been in a relationship for over a year with a man named Curtis Vance, a real estate investor who ran a small portfolio of flipped properties 2 states away in Indianapolis. Ray had photographs, a hotel parking lot, a shared dinner, the easy familiarity of 2 people who'd stopped being careful a long time ago. More importantly, Ray had found a signed purchase agreement, dated the same week as my forged power of attorney, in which my house, a house I had never agreed to sell, was already under contract to sell to a limited liability company registered to Curtis Vance, at nearly $200,000 below its actual appraised market value. The paperwork listed a closing date, 11 days out. They weren't planning to sell my house and split proceeds with me sidelined in some care facility somewhere. Sherry was planning to hand my house to her boyfriend at a steep discount, collect a $2 million life insurance payout whenever the progressive dementia eventually, conveniently, worsened into something fatal, and disappear into a new life in Indianapolis, leaving my own son standing in the wreckage of a failed landscaping business and a father he'd helped destroy for nothing. Grace laid the entire picture out for me in plain language on a Thursday afternoon, and I remember looking out her office window at the gray Ohio sky and feeling something settle in me that was almost peaceful. Not because I wasn't devastated, I was, more than I let myself show even to Grace, but because for the first time in months, I finally understood the shape of the thing I was fighting. You cannot dismantle a threat you don't understand. You can only understand it. I understood this one completely now. "What do you want to do?" Grace asked me. "With 11 days? I told her I wanted to let the closing proceed exactly as scheduled, right up until the moment before the money moved. And then I wanted every single person involved to watch it collapse in front of them, together, in the same room, at the same time. I want to tell you honestly, my friend, that the next 11 days were some of the hardest of my life. Harder even than the week we buried Carol, because I had to sit across the dinner table from my own son and pretend I still trusted him. I had to let Sherry set a pill bottle beside my coffee every morning and thank her for it while quietly disposing of every dose. I had to watch Michael avoid my eyes in a way I now understood wasn't guilt over the landscaping business at all, but something far closer to complicity he hadn't yet let himself name out loud. Grace, meanwhile, worked with a colleague specializing in elder law to file, quietly and without alerting anyone in my household, an emergency petition of my own, not one declaring me incompetent, but the opposite, a sworn, medically documented statement establishing my full legal capacity, supported by Dr. Whitfield's original blood work and a fresh, independent cognitive evaluation from a geriatric specialist at the university hospital, a woman named Dr. Naomi Castellano, who spent 2 full hours with me and concluded, in writing, that my cognitive function was entirely intact and had likely been chemically suppressed by an outside party. That single document, filed and time-stamped 4 days before the scheduled house closing, effectively immunized me against any future claim that I had been incapacitated when I later took action. With that foundation secured, Grace filed a second document, an emergency revocation of the fraudulent power of attorney, along with a formal notice to the title company handling the closing, informing them that the underlying authorization for the sale was forged and that any transfer of the property would constitute a knowing transaction in stolen real estate. She filed it not 11 days out, and not the day before, but exactly 90 minutes before the scheduled closing meeting, timed so precisely that the fraudulent chain of paperwork would collapse at the one moment it could do the most damage to everyone standing inside it. I insisted on being there in person when it happened. Grace argued against it for exactly 4 minutes before she saw my face and stopped arguing. The closing was scheduled at the title company's offices downtown, a bland, beige conference room with a long table and a pot of stale coffee nobody ever drank. Michael was there, visibly nervous in a way I now recognized as a man who suspected, somewhere beneath his own denial, that he'd been used. Sherry sat beside him, radiant and composed in a cream-colored blazer, already halfway into the role of a woman about to be free of both her husband and her father-in-law in one elegant transaction. Curtis Vance sat across the table, flanked by his own attorney, a younger man who kept checking his watch with the particular impatience of someone who bills by the hour and resents every minute spent waiting on other people's family drama. I walked in 11 minutes before the scheduled start, alone, wearing the same gray suit I used to wear to present quarterly numbers to the plant managers who trusted me with their production lines. I did not sit down. I stood at the head of the table, and I watched every face in that room shift through the same brief sequence: confusion, recalculation, and then, on Sherry's face specifically, the unmistakable flicker of a woman realizing the machine she'd engineered had just thrown its first part clean across the floor. "Dad," Michael started, half rising from his chair. "What are you?" "Sit down, son," I said, and my voice came out exactly as level as it had the day Sherry called me about the listing. I set a thick folder on the table, the same weight and heft as the ones I used to carry into supplier disputes back when a botched shipment threatened to shut down an entire assembly line. "I think everyone here should see what I've brought before we go any further." I opened the folder and began laying documents on the table, one at a time, the way you'd lay out evidence for an inspector who needed to see, not be told. The forged power of attorney, with Denise's certified recorder's stamp beside it confirming the filing date. Dr. Ferris's fraudulent cognitive evaluation, alongside his own state medical board monitoring order. My actual blood panel, showing the sedative compounds Sherry had been feeding me for 2 months disguised as vitamins. Priya's financial trace of the $80,000 siphoned from the landscaping loan into Sherry's maiden name account. The $2 million life insurance policy naming Sherry sole beneficiary, with Michael's name notably, permanently absent. And finally, Ray's photographs, and the purchase agreement showing my house under contract to sell to Curtis Vance's shell company at $200,000 below market value. The room went completely silent except for the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Curtis Vance's attorney picked up the purchase agreement first, scanning it with the fast, practiced eyes of a man calculating his own exposure. And I watched him physically lean away from Curtis at the table, putting several inches of distance between himself and his own client without seeming to notice he'd done it. Sherry recovered first, the way I imagine a woman like her always recovers first. "Walter, I don't know what you think you've found, but you're clearly confused. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking Dr. Ferris warned us about." "Dr. Ferris's medical license," I said, sliding the state board document directly in front of her, "has been under monitoring for 2 years for producing exactly this kind of evaluation, for exactly this kind of purpose. I'd be careful invoking his name as evidence of my confusion, Sherry, because it's actually the clearest evidence of your fraud." Michael had gone completely white, staring at the $80,000 trace, then at the life insurance policy, then finally, slowly, at his wife. "What is this?" he said quietly, and I could hear, for the first time in 8 months, my actual son underneath the man who'd stopped meeting my eyes. "Sherry, what is this?" "It's nothing," Sherry snapped. "Too fast. It's an old policy. It doesn't mean anything." "You're not listed on it, Michael," I said, and I let that sentence sit in the room exactly as long as it needed to. "Not as a beneficiary, not as a contingent beneficiary, not anywhere. $2 million, and your name is nowhere on the page." I watched my son's entire understanding of the last 4 years of his life collapse in real time, the particular devastation of a man realizing he hadn't been a partner in someone else's plan. He'd been a tool inside it, useful right up until the moment he stopped being necessary. "And the house," I continued, turning to Curtis Vance, whose attorney was already gathering his papers with the brisk, silent urgency of a man exiting a burning building, "was never Sherry's to sell. The power of attorney authorizing that sale is a forgery. I've already filed a revocation with the title company, effective 90 minutes ago, along with a formal notice that any transfer under that document constitutes a criminal transaction. Mr. Vance, I'd strongly recommend you consult separately with your attorney about your own exposure here, because a $200,000 discount on a property with a fraudulent chain of title tends to raise very specific questions with a prosecutor. Curtis Vance did not say a single word. He simply stood, buttoned his jacket with hands that weren't entirely steady, and walked out of the room without looking at Sherry once. His attorney followed half a step behind him, already dialing his phone before he'd cleared the doorway. The title company representative, a young woman who'd been sitting quietly through all of this with the wide-eyed stillness of someone watching a car accident unfold in slow motion, finally spoke. Mr. Bricknell, given what's been presented, we'll be immediately voiding this transaction and flagging the file for our compliance department. I think everyone else should probably leave. Sherry stood, gathering her things with shaking hands, her composure finally, completely gone. This isn't over, Walter, she said, and there was real venom in it now. No performance left in her voice at all. You have no idea what you've just done. I know exactly what I've done, I told her. I've done what you should have assumed I'd eventually do, since apparently nobody bothered to check whether I was actually paying attention. She left without another word. Michael stayed seated at the table long after everyone else had gone, staring at the folder of evidence like it might rearrange itself into something less catastrophic if he just looked at it long enough. Dad, he finally said, his voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. I didn't know about the doctor. I swear to you, I didn't know about the pills. I thought the vitamins were I thought she was actually trying to help take care of you. I believed him, and I didn't believe him, both at once. In the particular way you can hold two contradictory truths about your own child. I believed he hadn't known the specific mechanics of the poisoning. I did not believe he'd been entirely blind to the $80,000, or to the forged signature on a document, with his name as beneficiary of the very authority it granted. A man can be a victim and a participant in the same conspiracy. I'd learned that much these past 11 days. I know you didn't know everything, I said, but you knew enough to stop asking questions once the answers got inconvenient. That's its own kind of choice, Michael. I want to tell you, my friend, that this is the part of the story where I'd love to say my son, and I hugged it out, right there, in that beige conference room, and everything was healed. That's not what happened, and I won't pretend it did, because I think you deserve the truth more than you deserve a tidy ending. What happened instead took the better part of a year. Sherry was charged, eventually, with multiple felony counts, forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly person, and conspiracy. Once the county prosecutor's office finished building on the foundation, Grace and Priya and Ray had already assembled. Dr. Ferris lost his medical license entirely and is currently, I'm told, facing his own separate charges for the falsified evaluation. Curtis Vance was never criminally charged, but he lost his real estate license in the state after the board reviewed the discounted purchase agreement, and I understand his flipping business in Indianapolis quietly folded within the year. Sherry took a plea deal rather than risk trial, and is currently serving a sentence at a state facility in southern Ohio. The life insurance policy, once the fraud was documented, was voided entirely by the underwriter. Michael and I did not speak for almost 4 months after that day in the conference room. He moved out of the cottage, I asked him to, gently but firmly, because I needed the physical space to think clearly about what our relationship actually was underneath everything that had happened to it. He got a small apartment across town, took a job managing inventory at a hardware distributor. Unglamorous, steady work, the kind of work that pays a mortgage but doesn't make headlines. I heard, through mutual friends, that he attended some kind of counseling, trying to understand how he'd let himself get so thoroughly used by someone he'd trusted with his whole life. He called me on a Sunday evening in early spring, almost exactly 6 months after the closing that never happened. He didn't ask for anything. He just said he was sorry, plainly, without excuses, and that he understood if I never fully trusted him again, but he wanted me to know he was trying to become someone worth trusting eventually. I told him that was, as far as I was concerned, the only correct thing he could possibly have said to me, and that trust, like anything worth having, gets rebuilt the same slow way it was originally built. One honest day laid carefully on top of the last one. We have dinner together most Sundays now. It's not the relationship we had before, and I don't think it ever will be. Not entirely. There's a caution in both of us that wasn't there when Carol was alive. A habit of double-checking things we once simply took for granted. But he's rebuilding, slowly, and I've learned to let him. because the alternative, severing him completely the way I severed Sherry, never actually sat right with me the way I expected it to. I still own my house outright. The cottage sits empty most of the year now, though I've been thinking lately about renting it to a young family. Maybe someone just starting out, the way Carol and I once did in a rented garage with 2 second-hand lathes and more hope than money. I sold Bricknell Machine Works 2 years before any of this happened, to a group of long-time employees who wanted to keep it local rather than let it get swallowed by a larger conglomerate, and I still consult for them a few days a month, mostly because a man who spent 39 years reading blueprints has a hard time fully retiring the habit of paying close attention to details. I keep Grace's number saved at the top of my phone contacts now, not because I expect to need her again, but because I've learned something that I think is worth passing along to you, whoever you are, wherever you're listening to this from tonight. The people who love you the way they're supposed to will never one flinch when you ask a hard question, check a document twice, or bring in a second opinion. It's only the people quietly counting on your trust as a substitute for your attention who ever get nervous when you finally start paying it. I sat on my back porch last weekend, the same porch Carol and I used to share a pot of coffee on every Saturday morning, and I watched the light come up gold over the fence line she planted her garden along, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly, at peace. Not because everything worked out perfectly. It didn't. My son and I are still finding our way back to each other, slowly, imperfectly, one Sunday dinner at a time. But my house is mine. My mind is mine. Fully mine. No fog left in it anywhere. And the people who thought a tired old man in a quiet house wouldn't notice what was being taken from him learned, rather thoroughly, that quiet and unaware are two very different things. If anything in this story sounded familiar to you tonight, if you've ever felt that particular cold settle into your chest when someone you trusted started treating you like an obstacle instead of a father, I want you to hear this clearly. Pay attention to the quiet signs. Keep your own documents somewhere only you control. And never, ever, let anyone convince you that asking a hard question makes you the confused one in the room. Tell me, friend, where are you watching this from tonight? And has anyone in your own life ever mistaken your patience for weakness? I'd genuinely like to know. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in the next one.